Hey everybody, welcome back to One Seed, One World. So today we're going to talk about 3 things that you can do to prepare your raised beds to get them ready for the springtime for your planting. Now these are things that you can do in the fall, over the winter, or in the spring. It's normally better if you can do them in the fall or winter because when the spring rolls around, you're going to be wanting to get your plants in the ground or your seeds in the ground and not mess with some of these other things like cleanup and whatnot. So let's go over the 3 things really quick. So the first thing you want to do is get your beds cleaned out of any leftover plants and vegetation that you had from the previous season. A big thing for this are especially things like tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, and here's the reason why. Tomatoes, especially towards the end of the season, a lot of times can get things like fungus or blight, and that type of fungus or blight bacteria can get into the soil and kind of stay living in there and then can affect your plants the following year. So if you have plants that are affected by a type of fungus where it's killed them off the prior year, make sure you want to get those out of there first, because that could cause problems later on if that stuff continues to live in the soil. Now granted, it's probably going to have some stuff in the soil anyway, but by removing the plants, you're going to reduce future effects. With squash and cucumbers, it might be something like powdery mildew, which can travel quite a bit. And so, if you have affected plants, I would even recommend maybe burning them instead of putting them in compost. Another thing with the squash and cucumbers is if you leave the old leaves and stuff in there over the winter, it's a great place for things like squash bugs and cucumber beetles and squash vine borers to kind of hide out under, especially the squash bugs. They love kind of piling up underneath of dead leaves. And so getting that type of ready-made home for them out of the way will help you in the future. Number 2 is adding amendments to your soil. Things like compost, fertilizer, wood ash, those kind of things, especially if you can put them in over the fall and the winter. It kind of lets it work its way down through the soil as snow and rain comes. Kind of helps build up some of those good microorganisms in your soil. And so anything that you can add that will help throughout the fall and winter, and that will let it break down even more so that your soil is good and ready for you in the spring. I use primarily used rabbit litter and rabbit poop. And I just, sorry, this is heavy. The great thing about the rabbit poop is it's cold compost, so it doesn't have to be composted, broken down first for months on a time, like you have to do with cow manure, chicken manure, and horse manure. I have a whole video on rabbit poop. If you want to check that out, I'll put a link below. But putting this in the soil, like I'll work this down throughout the winter, and then right before I'm ready to plant, I will also probably add a top layer of like a soil and organic leaf compost mix that I normally use, just to kind of top it off. And then I'll have all this great stuff buried in my soil and ready for my plants to help feed them and grow them throughout this coming season. I mentioned the wood ash. If you have a fireplace or a fire pit, wood ash adds a lot of great stuff to your soil as well. It can help balance your soil if you've got very acidic soil. It can raise the level up and kind of balance out your pH and make it more alkaline, less acidic, which, that helps a lot of plants. Now, if you're growing something like blueberries, you wouldn't want to do that because blueberries prefer a more acidic soil. But with your general tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, all that kind of thing, they like a little bit more balance to the soil. And so by adding some wood ash, you're helping that balance. And also wood ash does contain calcium, phosphorus, also some trace amounts of zinc and copper, and other trace nutrients that your plants really like. For the amount of wood ash, I did see one recommendation that was about 2 ounces per square yard. So that's not a lot, you know, so you can kind of sprinkle it out. It's about half of as effective as if you were to use lime. But if you've already got, you know, like a fireplace or something that you're just dumping your wood ash out of the fireplace anyway, then put it in your garden, spread it around. Spread the love, man. And then the final thing that you might want to do is any repairs or staining your wood, if you have to replace anything, get that taken care of before you get out there and start planting. Like example, this is the first bed that I ever built a few years ago, and a couple of the boards have started to, these top boards, while all the base is still fine, a couple of these top boards, you know, they get a lot more sun, and I didn't give this one quite enough under support, and so you see it's kind of popped up out. So I will probably either take this whole board off or cut off this part that's bent and put a shorter board in that's less prone to bowing and pulling out. And then also maybe put a coat of stain on some of these outside boards. Now, if you're not comfortable with using a stain, if you're afraid of like the chemicals getting into your soil and whatnot, you could also use raw linseed oil. Don't get the boiled. Boiled linseed oil has an extra additive in it that helps it dry faster. It's really not good for your plants and can leach into the soil. So if you decide to go with the linseed oil, go with the raw, not the boiled. Now, in my case, I've used both linseed oil and I've used stain because the primary part of my beds are metal, and the only part of the wood is on the outside of the metal. It's not touching the soil. Now, granted, I could still get a minimal amount of leaching. I go as organically as possible, but you know, for me, I'm comfortable with maybe using a stain on the outside that's not going to be touching anything that I'm going to be eating, since all the metal is on the inside of the way I build these and touching the soil, and the wood is not. So there's that. So while my front beds are all cleaned out and ready to go just about, these back beds, I still have quite a bit of work to do with cleaning out the old beans and putting some more rabbit poop and stuff back in here. So I still have some work to do in that regard. I wasn't quite as on the ball this year with getting all my beds cleaned out. I only focused on the front beds and not the back. So I still have some work to do. But that's 3 things and 1 screaming bantam rooster. But that's 3 things that you can do to kind of get your beds, your raised beds ready for your next planting season. The earlier you get it done, the much better it will be for you. It'll give your beds time for the fertilizer or compost or whatever it is that you're putting in there to work its way in. All the leftover leaves and, you know, stalks and stuff won't be in your way, and so you'll be able to come right out and plant your seeds, plant your transplants, get started right away. So I hope you find that information helpful. If there's anything that I didn't put in here, if you can think of some other things that maybe that you do for your raised beds, please put a comment below and share with the rest of the community. And I think that's it for today. Whatever's going on in your neck of the woods, I hope it is working out fantastic for you and that you have had a great winter. We're coming into planting season, so we're just about there, depending on where you live, but I'm getting really close for some of the early crops. But thanks for hanging out with me again today, and we will see you again soon. Namaste.